Hi friends! Today I have a very cool and I think helpful video for you guys. I just wanted to sit down and talk with you because I have a lot of things to share, because I feel like my experience and this video might help some of you that are learning to knit or want to learn to knit. And for my background, I started with crochet about 4 years ago, and only recently I decided that I need to learn something new because I got bored, and also knitting has always been scary. I don't know why, but I think a lot of people can relate to that. Take a deep breath, because the thing that I'm going to show you right now will blow your mind away. This is my first thing I ever knit. The only reason I'm not wearing it right now is because I've been wearing it for the past 2 weeks every other day, and I think people started to notice. I need to chill out, but I just do it because I love it so much. Anyway, we are going to start with the tools that you're going to want or you're going to need to have to learn knitting. So what's the first thing you think about? It's yarn and needles, and the needles are those sticks. And my advice is that if you have those, start with them, they're fine. But if you want to invest, buy circular needles like these. Circular needles look scary. They look scary for some reason, because this is not something you think of. Because when knitting, you're imagining this grandma sitting on her rocking chair by the fireplace, and she's doing this with big sticks. I think circular needles are better because you can do the same thing you can do with those. You can knit like panels, but also you can knit in a round, so you don't have to seam the panels together. And also the other reason I think those are so much better, it's because they're short, so it's very comfortable to knit. But if you had those very long needles, you don't have enough space to work with them, and you can poke somebody's eye, or if your cat is sitting next to you. I wouldn't say it's dangerous, but those are better, those are safe and more comfortable. So if you're looking to buy a new set, just go with these. So another thing you want to know about is what kind of yarn to choose. And there's so many options you can choose from. There are yarns that are thick, thin, soft, different material. You can have yarn from plants, cotton, bamboo, etc. And you can have yarns that are from animals, which is wool, alpaca, silk, mohair. A certain fiber is more expensive. For example, the most cheap yarn that you can find anywhere, it's acrylic. And acrylic is synthetic, it's made out of plastic. That's why it's cheap. Another thing you need to know is each yarn will have a label, and on this label you have everything you need to know about the yarn. You'll have information about how to take care of the yarn, and you'll have information about what size of needles you need to use. Because if you knit with bigger size needles like these are 9 millimeters. If you knit with this cotton yarn, you're going to have holes in it, and that's not what you want unless this is what you want, unless you're going for this style. And now, if you're just starting out, I would recommend using a stretchy material. For example, wool. Wool is very stretchy, and cotton yarn, it's not. It's very stiff when you knit with it. It will be very uncomfortable to knit with cotton because you cannot stretch it with needles. And now we can move on to beginner essentials. Start with a light colored yarn, like this, for example. It's because when you have light colored yarn, you can see the stitches easier. I started with this yellow wool yarn, and it was very easy to see the stitches, see the mistakes I made. So just go with light colored yarn, not black. Don't go with black. Start with an easy project. Don't do this. I did it only because I knew how to crochet, and I knew that I'm going to love the process because I did a lot of things. And I just didn't mind jumping straight into this huge project. But I recommend to start with something very simple that you can do even in one evening, like a headband, like a coaster, like just very simple thing that you can finish very quickly, because you can get very easily discouraged. You will not finish it. I'm going to tell you the truth. Your first project isn't going to be amazing. I'm saying this from my experience because yes, this is the first project that I made, but I had to unravel it a few times. Bigger needles, bigger yarn is easier to work with because it's easier to see and you're just knitting faster. Because stitches are big, so you are immediately rewarded seeing how much you've done in such a little time. I hope you know what I mean, but if I made my first project with this, I would probably not be finished by now. So now that we learned about yarn and needles, we know what tools we're using, but we don't know how to use them. So to knit, you only need 3 things. First, you need to learn how to cast on, and casting on is basically putting yarn on your needles. Casting on is just starting a project. Then you need to learn how to knit stitch. And knit stitch is basically just this kind of stitch. And the third thing you need to learn is how to purl stitch. And purl stitch will look like this. So now I'm not going to teach you how to do this because there are tons of amazing tutorials that will teach you in a very slow pace how to do this. I'm just going to show you how I do this. To start the project, we need to make a slip knot, of course. There are different ways to do it, but I just do a cross on my fingers and then I go under and take this yarn and pull it, and now we have a slip knot. And here's the tricky part, because depending on your project, this tail that I have left could be different. If you have like a small project, the tail will be short, and if you are doing like a sweater, the tail will be super long. And this is important to know because you're going to take this yarn with you when you're knitting. So what happens when this will run out? Then you have to redo the whole thing. So I'm going to show you a cool way how to estimate the amount of yarn you'll need. Let's say you want to cast on 10 stitches. If so, you want to wrap your yarn around your needle 10 times. So this is the amount of yarn I need for 10 stitches. So now I would make a slip knot somewhere here. But what if you want more? For example, if you want to cast on 50 stitches, then you would just measure this that way. Take here, 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 and here. I don't know, I didn't count, but you get the drill. Now, a very important thing, you want to have your working yarn away from you, and by working yarn I just mean the one attached to your skin, and the dead end of your yarn you want to have closer to yourself. So now casting on, I just take both, put my fingers and I spread, turn, and I go here, and pull. You don't want to squeeze it. So after you do this and this, don't pull very tightly, because then you're going to put your other needle into this stitch. So I casted on a few stitches and now I'm going to show you how to knit. Now I'm turning the needle like this. You might be confused by which strand of yarn is which. The important thing is that the working yarn needs to go in this direction. Okay, so now this is how making a knit stitch looks like. So I put my second needle under here and then I grab the yarn and pull it out, and then I slip this yarn off my needle. Purling is just going, instead of here, you're going to go here, so like this, and then you wrap around and pull it through. In this part of the video, I'm going to dive into mistakes that I made and I'll try to help you avoid them. So if your project is knitting in a round, like mine was, you need to be extra careful not to twist your work. And twisted work will look like this. It can happen when you cast it on all of your stitches onto your needle, then you connected them in a round and you're knitting and you knitted on the wrong side of your project. So to avoid this, when you're knitting to the third round, your work looks like a string of yarn, so you can't really tell which side is which. So to avoid this, you need to just be careful not to twist your work. You just have to think every time that you're not sure what you're doing, lay your project down to see if it's not twisted. And you just have to do this in the beginning, because later when you knit, your project will become bigger and you can easily see which side is which, but it's just something to look out for in the beginning. Another thing are lost stitches. And lost stitches happen when you're knitting and one stitch just falls off your hook. You might not notice that. You might just go with it and you might notice it later. Or you might just see it disappearing with your own eyes. And if you do any of those, don't panic. Don't panic, because that's what I did. I panicked. I thought my project is ruined. I'm going to start over for the 5th time or something. Almost every mistake is fixable. So what you need to do, you just need to go to YouTube or Google how to fix my stitch and just follow the tutorial. That's all you need to do, and don't panic because you're going to be fine. Another mistake is twisting the stitches. This is the reason I had to unravel my project, because I didn't know that I was twisting stitches. So yeah, twisted stitches look like these, and these are normal stitches. And twisted stitches are more likely to happen if you're knitting in a round. These are the normal stitches. This row is where I started to twist. For example, when you stretch the material, it behaves a bit differently than normal stitches. So I wouldn't recommend choosing a project knitted in a round, because it's more likely to twist the stitches, and at this point you're not sure how a correct stitch should look like. And you can see that the stitch that you're going to knit right now, it's twisted. You can counter it. This is how a correct stitch looks like. You would just go here in the back and like this, and this is a correct stitch. But sometimes if you don't know how you should knit properly, you would go from here. You would go from here and do basically the same thing. And now this causes a twisted stitch, which you can see here. And this is not only the way you can make these mistakes. Sometimes when your stitch drops, you want to put it back on your loop. So sometimes you don't know how to do it, so instead of putting it back as it was, you could twist it like this. And now you can see that this stitch is a bit different than the second one. It's because it's twisted. And if you would knit this stitch the way you were taught to knit from the back, you will get a twisted stitch. So you have two ways to fix this. First is just taking it off the hook and putting it back the way it should be. Or you don't have to do that. You can just counter it, which is, instead of knitting from the back like you were taught in a tutorial, you just do it from here. And that's how you fix it. Not pull your yarn too tight. So this is a very, very common mistake that people who crochet and people who knit do when they're beginning. It's just the feel that If you don't squeeze it, it will unravel, but it won't. It's actually better to make it a bit loose than very tight, because that just looks bad. Another tip I have for you is using stitch markers. There are different stitch markers. I used these ones. I recommend using them when, for example, your pattern says that you need to cast on 100 stitches. If you're just learning how to do that, you're not very fast with casting on, and you're in general not very fast. It's very easy to just lose count of them. Just counting the stitches is very daunting, so what I would recommend is putting a marker every 10th stitch, so then you can just easily count like, oh okay, I have 10 stitch markers, which means I have 100 stitches. Next thing is, I think my biggest advice from my whole heart for you is, don't be afraid to unravel. And I know that it hurts. It hurt me so much when you did this amount of work and you decide that there's, for whatever reason, you need to unravel, and you're just doing this and you're seeing it and you're crying inside, and that's okay, because that means you learned something. And it's better to unravel than to just keep going with it, knowing that there's something wrong with this, so that when you're finished with it, you will not wear it. You will hate it. You will throw it inside your, I don't know, box somewhere. And I know, like, for example, you spent 2 days on it yesterday, so it's very hard. I understand that it's very hard to just get rid of this progress, but in the long run, like, try to look at it from bigger perspective. It's only 2 days. For example, I did this, I think I had like half of the sweater done and I had to unravel, and I'm so glad I did, because now knowing that this sweater up to this point had twisted stitches, I would not love this that much. I love it now. Another thing very important to know is that your project won't look like the one in a pattern. It's because everyone knits differently. For example, the person that made the pattern might knit a bit loose and you knit a bit tighter. For example, I made this from a pattern and it should look like this. It just looks different, because when I made it, I wasn't familiar with gauge. Gauge is a small swatch. It's the number of stitches and rows per inch or per centimeter in your knitted fabric. And if you want your work to look exactly like the pattern, you need to make something as the gauge swatch. And basically it's a small piece of your knitted work. Usually gauge swatch is supposed to be a square, so you can measure like from this side to this side, but I was a bit lazy, so I just made this for my next sweater that I'm making, because I actually don't care about measuring the height, because I'm going to try it on as I go, so that's how I will adjust it. So if you want your work look exactly like the one in pattern, you need to measure your gauge and adjust it as needed. I made my sweater from this pattern, and it's the Open Trail sweater vest by Ashley Lillis. And here I can see the gauge that she wrote, which is 10 stitches and 13 rows for 4 inches or 10 centimeters. So now I'm going to check if my sweater actually fits this gauge. Probably not, because it's not the same, it's not how it's supposed to look. So we're going to check what's the problem, because I didn't do it. Normally using centimeters, but I'm going to use inches, because most of you guys that watch me are from the US, so I'm doing this for you. So every stitch is a V. So for example, this is a V, and I'm going to measure from the left side of this V. So I'm going to put a darning needle here so it helps me read it, and I just want to count how many stitches I have for those 4 inches. I would say I have 10.5 stitches for 4 inches, which is a half a stitch bigger, because it said it was supposed to be 10. And now I'm going to check the rows, and the rows you do basically the same thing, but in this direction. So I counted them and I have 17 and it was supposed to be 13. That's why my sweater is bigger than I expected it to be. Okay, cool, so you know so much about it, so you're in a better place than I was, and look what I did. I really hope that watching it might help you. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to, you can check out my Instagram where I post about my knitting stuff and also what I do in my daily life sometimes. See you in the next video. Bye!